We're joined by Brian Rosh. Brian is the Senior Treasury Manager over at Service Experts Heating and Air Conditioning, I'm sorry. And Brian's going to be chatting with us today about his career, his views on networking and relationships and how they've benefited him throughout the course of his career, and then also about making intentional moves in your career. So Brian, thank you very much for joining us. How are you today?
That's great. I'm happy to join you. Appreciate it, Joe.
Absolutely. And where are you joining us from?
So I'm in the DFW area.
Yeah.
Moved down here just under 6 months ago as I started a new role at Service Experts. So new to the area and just getting familiar with it and just trying to figure out what's open in the COVID environment. But enjoying it so far, definitely.
Perfect. Well, thanks for your time. And as always, we're joined by Simon Lynch. Simon, how are you today?
Very well, thanks, Joe. I'm loving being away on holidays in a very, very remote little place 5 hours north of Sydney and getting in some good surfing.
Yeah, you had showed us just a little bit of the views and the beach that you're looking at prior to this. And as I'm sitting here in Michigan, I want to get on the next flight. So thanks for that little bit of a little bit of jealousy there. So, and as always, Scotty's monitoring the conversation for any questions from the community. Scotty, sitting in Utah, how are you today?
Doing great, Joe. Thank you for asking.
All right, great. So with that, Brian, we're going to put you on the hot seat here. We're going to start off with Simon. Simon, let's get rolling.
So Brian, you've spent the majority of your career with Caterpillar, and I love capital-intensive businesses from a treasury perspective. And then recently, 6 months ago, you've joined the Service Experts. Talk us through what you would see as some of the highlights of your career so far.
Sure. Yeah, I consider myself pretty lucky. I had 2 internships with Caterpillar during college, and then I started full time right after leaving college. And I ended up spending 12 years with Caterpillar, which in this day and age I think is pretty rare. Spending 12 years with one company. Really enjoyed my time at Caterpillar. The thing I really appreciated at Caterpillar is that the folks there, especially the leadership team over Treasury, was very intentional about career development. And one of the things that was stressed to me and my colleagues early on in our career is that you want to build a good base, a good, diverse base that'll support your long-term career, always thinking about what your long-term career goals are. So when I think back in my time at Caterpillar, I had a lot of diverse job experiences. You know, I worked in a number of different jobs, but primarily in the areas of corporate treasury, and also spent a good deal of time in supply chain finance. And then the last role I had at Caterpillar was on our corporate FP&A and M&A team. So those were kind of 3 main areas where I worked, specifically within treasury. Had some experience in cash, accounts receivable, and also our capital markets team, among a few other job roles. What was great about that is, you know, when I think about my time in supply chain finance, for example, I was in a finance and treasury role, still applying the finance skill set I had and growing and developing that, but I was supporting our procurement function. So it was kind of a dual benefit. I was getting additional treasury finance experience and getting secondary procurement experience. I was able to sit in a number of different negotiations with the buyers, talking to suppliers, working through lead times and that kind of thing. And so, you know, got to see that procurement world and be a part of that. Then on the M&A side, you know, very strategic focus type role, heavy financial modeling, doing valuations of different companies and that kind of thing. So a lot of great experience that I got to get through that, all of which support my current treasury career and support my long-term goals as well. So I really appreciated that diversity in job roles that I was able to get at Caterpillar. It was a great time. Made a lot of great relationships while I was there. And, you know, Simon, as you alluded to, working for such a capital-intensive business like Caterpillar, we had to be very cash flow focused. And so Treasury was at the heart of that. Got to be a part of a lot of key strategic projects that went on that were related to cash flow management. Specifically, when I was in the supply chain finance team, you know, we had a critical supplier This was in 2016, which was a severe downturn for all commodities related businesses. Other industries didn't feel it at all. But we had a significant downturn. We had a supplier that was struggling, and we had to offer them support and was part of a inventory finance solution. I helped structure that, implement it, and see that project through. Temporarily relocated to the supplier's facility just to be on site, and I was a treasury finance guy, but I spent most of my time out in their plant, being a part of that, looking at the inventory management side, because that's ultimately what we were financing. And so it was a kind of you can almost call it an operations heavy role, but ultimately because it was so capital intensive being at Caterpillar, had to be called upon to figure out how we finance this inventory. And so got to be a part of that. That was definitely a highlight. And then another highlight was specific to Treasury, thinking when I was on our capital markets team, we did a refresh of our balance sheet strategy. We wanted to understand how should we be approaching cash deployment, thinking about the health of Caterpillar's balance sheet. As you may know, Caterpillar was and is a very cyclical company. And so the cash deployment and balance sheet decisions that we made during the good times, we had to take a through cycle view because we needed that financial support, that balance sheet strength for an inevitable downturn. And Caterpillar's downturns were deep. And the culture at Treasury was very much a through cycle. Let's analyze the peaks and the troughs. Let's take a holistic view and let's make sure we're focused on that. And that was a really great experience. I consider myself lucky to have worked for a company like Caterpillar during that time, for sure.
Yeah, it seems to be a trend that we notice with practitioners and those who are effective and really want to become effective in Treasury. It's getting outside of your comfort zone within Treasury, getting to learn and getting exposure to other areas of the business and finding out how you can make that impact. And then that's how you're becoming a strategic partner. So it's really cool to hear about your experience and someone who's lived something or has lived a story like that.
Yeah, and like I said, it's at a personal level, it keeps it interesting for you. One of the things I think is great about Treasury, for example, is that no matter what your skill set, no matter what your personality, there is an opportunity for everyone. If you're an operations focused person, you're all about process improvement. Okay, there's a number of operations jobs that exist in Treasury. And then if you're someone who likes financial markets, you could pursue a role in a capital markets type role or a risk management role or data analytics. There's a lot of data, and as Treasury is evolving, there's a big piece of that in terms of technology. But to be successful in Treasury, no matter what the role is, I think you have to understand the business. Because at the end of the day, your job within Treasury is to fund the business, manage the cash within the business. If you don't understand how your company makes money, if you don't understand what the capital investments are going to be, you're not in a position where you can make good decisions on how best to finance the company, on how best, what type of debt structure do you need, what type of capital requirements will the company have. And whatever company you're in, it's important to get to know that business, and a good way to do that is to seek out diverse job opportunities within that company. And even if they aren't diverse jobs, at least through that networking and mentoring piece, look to gain more knowledge and more experience outside of the silo that you're sitting in.
Indeed. Yeah, we talk about that a lot, Brian, on this platform, but hearing it coming from you as a practitioner, it carries a ton of weight. But when you and I had initially connected, we talked a little bit about, being intentional with your career choice. And that's really why you're here today, is the move from Caterpillar to your current role. It was an intentional move. You shared an interesting story about how you started and then where you ended up. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that process.
It's funny we're having this call right now, because I would say I really started the process January 1st of last year. And, it was January 1st. I basically spent the entire month of January really focused on getting my resume updated and getting my LinkedIn profile polished up and started looking at jobs. And, well, let me take a step back first. So if I go back, we'll say 2017, 2018 timeframe, I was very happy at Caterpillar, got great experience, but I started realizing that my long-term career plans, my long-term career goals probably weren't aligned to what I could get at Caterpillar and what I ultimately wanted to achieve. And so I started thinking about, okay, I want to, at some point, I think I'm going to take a step to leave Caterpillar and pursue a new opportunity. And at that point in time, I kind of took an assessment of myself. I said, okay, what are the key experiences that I have and where I want to go? And at that point in time, I had not yet worked on our capital markets team at Caterpillar. So I was very intentional about getting on that team because I knew that was going to be very important and very great experience for me, because at the time I was thinking whether I stay at Caterpillar or pursue other opportunities, that's a great experience for a treasury professional. So I wanted to get that. So I was very intentional, got on that team, got that experience. While in that role, was very fulfilling. An opportunity came up on the M&A team. And I thought, this is again a way to diversify my career experience. This also could be very supportive in terms of my long-term career goals. So I'm going to take this opportunity as well, right? And so that was about the last 3 years of my time at Caterpillar. Again, thinking about what the 5 and 10-year career plan was, and then knowing that, okay, I think at some point I'll probably step away from CAT and pursue new opportunities. And so, I go back to last year, started getting the resume updated. And it was in February where I really got active in looking and applying for new jobs, right? And it was, so if you remember your history, February, COVID had not yet reached the US. Okay, so it was business as usual back in February, and I was getting some bites, applying for some jobs, seeing what I was qualified for, what I wasn't, what companies were interested in me, which ones weren't. And things were moving forward. And then out of nowhere, of course, COVID hit the US and everything went on lockdown. And at that point in time, I was thinking to myself, okay, this job search, I'll continue it, but more than likely, this is probably on hold for a few months. But I continued to look for job roles, and my mindset did change a little bit. My mindset then became, okay, this may be a year-long process, and I was okay with that. But even through COVID, started to found a couple of companies that popped up, and of course, what was unique is all the interviews and initial discussions were via phone call and through a Zoom call like this. And so the whole interview process was different, rather than making sure my shoes were polished and my shirt was pressed. I had to make sure the lighting was good. I had to make sure the audio was working. And I, going into those interviews, needed to make sure that did a couple test runs with my wife. We did Zoom calls. So, hey, can you hear me? And so it's a different mindset now. Now, when this is the platform that we're using, you gotta think differently going into those interviews. Ultimately, service experts found that role, looked like a great opportunity. Went through the interview process and was ultimately selected. And then started the role remote from Illinois, and again working from home the whole time, and then ultimately moved down to Texas about a month later. But what was unique is joining the company, getting onboarded completely remote. And I'm very appreciative to service experts in the way in which they made this happen and made it work for me. They did a lot of work on the front end, making sure I had everything I need in advance of my first day, all the technology I needed, and having all the documentation sent to my home. So I was ready to go. But then once I started, I quickly realized that the typical introduction process was going to be different. And so I made sure to set up a lot of introductory phone calls and Zoom calls just to get to know others. And it's been a little different, a little challenging to fully develop those relationships, but just having to be intentional about that. And, again, picking up the phone sometimes just to have a conversation, not because we need to talk business, but because that's the only way I can develop these relationships in this environment where everything's remote.
Yeah, those are typically the water cooler conversations, or maybe you're going out to lunch or something like that. But now it's got to be a phone call or a Zoom call, just to not necessarily talk shop, but you mix that in with personal life, like, hey, who are you? What are you about? Like, just all that type of stuff. So, if you don't mind me asking, when did that switch flip for you, or what caused that switch to flip for you, where you realized you needed to become more intentional in your search, where you took stock of, the skills that you had and the skills that you needed in order to advance? Like, what was the trigger for you?
Yeah, it was, there was some of it was timing in my personal life, right?
Okay.
There were some things that, I wasn't in a position where I could move or start looking for new jobs. So timing worked out in my personal life, but strictly from a professional perspective, I was ready for the change. I had felt like I had, gotten the necessary experiences that I needed and that I wanted at Caterpillar. And ultimately, I was thinking through it and doing a comparison. Okay, over the next 5 years, do I think I can get better experience with my current employer, or should I look elsewhere? And I think in that situation, when you're looking for a new job, you have to be very intentional about what you're looking for in that new role. Don't just take a new job just because, right? And so for me, there were a couple things that I was specifically interested in. And one is I wanted to get supervisor experience. I wanted to move into a management role, and I wanted to go to a smaller company so that I could have more broader responsibilities and experiences. Caterpillar was great is that you're Fortune 50 company, public company, global company. So you get a lot of very deep experience, but sometimes it's rather narrow. And so I knew that, again, in terms of thinking about my continued development, where were my gaps? Again, I needed broader experience across the treasury function, and knowing that smaller companies would offer that for me. And so that was kind of the trigger for me, is just taking stock, kind of some of the experiences I had, and then what were some of the gaps, and then what was the best way to achieve that.
Brian, how important was networking and mentorship through that intentional process that you went through? And I guess on the back of that, what advice would you have for listeners about approaching that networking and mentorship?
Yeah, when I started the process, I reached out to someone who had recently had a job change, a former colleague of mine, and he gave me some advice that was invaluable. He said, never assume that you're not qualified for a job, and never assume that you're too qualified for a job. And that was great advice, because there was one job role that came up I thought I wasn't qualified for. I then decided to apply the second time, and that specific job, although I got pretty far in the interview process, was the runner-up selected. So I ultimately didn't get that job role, but it proved to me that a job that I initially thought I was not qualified for, I clearly was qualified for. On the other side, that was invaluable advice, because when I first saw this role with service experts, I looked at it and immediately moved on, because it was the way it read initially, or I should say the way I read it initially. I thought it was an analyst role that they tried to put lipstick on it and make it sound like an impressive manager role. I came across it the second time, read it a little bit more closely, and I said, actually, this looks like a pretty good role. I don't think I'm too good for this job. I think I'll go ahead and apply. So I applied, and then as we got through the interview process, and I was able to start asking more questions, and quickly realized that, no, this is a great role. This is a great company. They're doing some interesting things. So I definitely want to see this through. And so without that advice, I would have missed out on this opportunity entirely. So that was great.
Like one of the important things, Brian, that you've just mentioned there is, and we say this a lot, you don't really know until you have a conversation what a job really is. As much as, there's an advert or people talk to you about things, I'm a big believer in actually just going and having a conversation, talking to people, and then making a decision, because so often you read the wrong message that comes in a job advert, or you just, someone doesn't sell it particularly well. So until you have that conversation, you're really just guessing what it is. If you go along, have a conversation, learn more about the person that you'll be reporting to and the job, then you can make an informed decision.
Yeah, exactly. And that was very key with this role. as you just said, because, service experts, we're making some big changes to our capital structure, basically completely changing that up. And, it's been a lot of very interesting work, be able to be a part of that. And, that's experience that's going to be invaluable for me. And that didn't fully come through in the job description, but it was loud and clear when I started speaking with the CFO, who was the hiring manager.
Awesome. Very cool. So just on the theme of advice, if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to yourself as a young professional, what would that be?
I would say, don't be afraid to stretch yourself. Be eager to learn and grow. I look back at some of the jobs I had going into them. I didn't realize what value or benefits I was going to have. I mentioned working in supply chain finance and being able to get kind of cross experience with the procurement function, which allowed me to negotiate raw material contracts and got a lot of experience reviewing legal contracts. And then in my current role in Treasury, recently I was reviewing a legal agreement. I thought to myself, I'm sure glad I got that experience back in supply chain finance, because I now have experience reviewing legal contracts. Or, in my current role in Treasury, doing some financial modeling, I think back, I'm really glad I got that experience in M&A, where it was heavy financial modeling. I was able to hone in my skills with financial modeling that I can then apply today in a Treasury career. And so I think it's important to get that diverse experience, and it's important to stretch yourself. And, with that too, one of the things that I've done, it started as part of this process last year when I was looking to make the job change. I did a personal SWOT analysis, looking at my strengths and weaknesses. And what that does is that you really take an inventory on your career. What have you done? What experiences do you have? And it's a good time to reflect on, what experience you got that maybe you weren't expecting to have. And so you can't be scared to step out of your comfort zone. It's very important to do that and stretch yourself, because even if you want to have a long-term career in Treasury, Treasury requires a diverse skill set, and you can't acquire or obtain the necessary skills exclusively within Treasury roles, or without seeking out that additional learning opportunities, whether it be through different job roles or through different mentors, getting that experience. And so that'd be my recommendation to my younger self and other young employees starting out their career, is just look to get that diverse experience.
No, it's perfect. We talk about it all the time, right? Like Treasury professionals or practitioners by nature, a little bit more risk averse. You have to be in order to be successful in your job, but at the same time, you can hold yourself back if you get in your head and you don't take risks personally occasionally.
Yeah, definitely.
So, well, knowing that you've covered a Fortune 50 organization, you've worked your way through the Treasury function in a larger team, and now moved to maybe a smaller organization with a larger scope. You're kind of getting the full gambit of organizational structures and everything else that goes into that. Just over the course of your career, what have you learned, or what makes a successful Treasury professional in the eyes of the CFO or the C-level or the board, and basically leadership within an organization?
Yeah, I think you mentioned that the risk averse piece. I think a CFO doesn't want a cowboy in the treasurer's seat, right? But I think first and foremost, a Treasury professional, our job is to manage the cash, right? And to do that, we have to, as I touched on earlier, to do that, to manage the balance sheet and to manage your cash, you have to know what's going on in the business. And so I think in the eyes of the CFO and the CEO, from a Treasury practitioner, you need to know what's going on in the business. And I think if you can communicate that to the executive leadership team, you can say, hey, given the capital intensive nature of this business, here's what I recommend for a financing strategy, or here's how I recommend we manage our cash deployment. I think that will give greater confidence to the leadership team in terms of whatever treasury strategy you're recommending, if you can prove and show that you understand the full business.
Makes sense.
Brian, one last question for you. Technology is changing very rapidly. How do you see the role of Treasury changing in the coming years based on the tech advancements that we're seeing?
Sure, I think that's most likely going to be seen on the operational side of the business. And so, certainly there's a lot of opportunities there. And I would say, again, one of those unique skill sets for a treasury practitioner. I think in the technology space, we got to get very comfortable with technology, knowing how to use technology and where to implement it. That's not something you're going to learn in a finance textbook. So that's something as treasury practitioners we need to work on and be thinking about. And again, I think that's largely going to occur in the operational space. So there's an efficiency element that will occur from that. And then in the other thing I think is going to be key for treasury professionals is just the areas of risk management. When you think about what we're going through right now with COVID, right? And no one could have predicted this. And so, there's a lot of technology tools that exist and can be used in the area of risk management. On the far extreme, there's machine learning and artificial intelligence. That's on a pretty extreme end, but I think there's lighter versions of that even at a small mid-cap company, treasury practitioners are going to have to get comfortable with that level of technology for modeling and scenario planning, because I think that's going to be key. Because if you're not modeling out trough scenarios such as what we're in right now from a COVID perspective, you can't forecast this, but if you have to be able to run a scenario, a what if scenario, and be prepared for that. And technology is going to be a key to enable that going forward.
No, that's great insight, and thank you. We did have one additional question come in through text earlier today, and it was just more along the lines of what strategies should a treasury practitioner consider when moving within and across an organization. And I think it's very relevant to you, seeing as how you did make those moves. And I'll be honest, like a lot of questions that I have or a lot of conversations that I have with practitioners, there's a little bit of a hesitation or reluctance to say, well, I work in cash, and if I start asking questions about the FX team, people are going to be worried about why are you looking into FX, or why are you worried about what I'm doing? So I guess what was your strategy with that, and how did you overcome maybe that fear? It might not have existed for you, but if it did, how did you overcome that?
Yeah, that's it's a little bit of a dance, right? Walking up to your boss and saying, "Hey, I want to lead this group." So it is a delicate manner, but it's as I said before, treasuries are unique in that it requires a very diverse skill set for a treasury career. And so one of the things you need to be thinking about is think long term. What is your long term career goals? Okay, if it's to have a 10-year career in treasury, okay, that's great. Okay, do you aspire to become a director in treasury, an assistant treasurer, treasurer, CFO, whatever it may be? Think about your long-term goals, and then evaluate what skill sets are needed to get there. Then take an inventory of your experience and your skill set to see what do you have, where are you deficient, and then figure out how you're going to develop those remaining deficiencies. And at the end of the day, that's going to tell you what job move you need to make to build that skill set so you can get to where you want to be, right? Yeah. And a good leader should be supporting you in those endeavors, right? And I think if you're in a position where you think that your leader is going to be hesitant about that, about making a move into a new area, moving from cash to FX, as an example, you said, Joe, I think just have the seek input from that leader. Ask them, say, hey, what do you think? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What do you think I should do to further develop my weaknesses, further develop my strengths, and then work on my weaknesses? Have it be a two-way conversation. And because whether you have a strong leader or not, it's good to get their input. I understand their views, because typically they're going to have more experience. Maybe they've been in that role longer, and look back at their career. How did they get to where they are, and then seek that advice from them. And so eventually, I think most leaders would come around and agree that yes, it's important that you develop, and it's important that you work towards your long-term goals. And so I think more often than not, they'll ultimately support you, right, as you talk through that and as you have those conversations. But you might have to be tactful about how you go about doing it.
Yeah, and it's great advice, and I think you, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I think you went about it the right way. And the other piece to this too is, as a leader, if you have someone who wants to cross train or learn about a different area in the team, it helps with business continuity planning if someone's out of the office or goes on vacation or anything else. So like if I'm sitting in the leader's seat, of course I want to cross train my team. It makes sense.
Yeah, that's a conversation we've had recently at Service Experts, right? Because we want to make sure we're developing our staff accountants and our finance analysts to become managers at one point. So there's that development element, number one. Number two, you want to ensure that the employees know that there's growth and promotion opportunities within the company. And so if you're just waiting for someone above you to move on, well, you might end up waiting a long time. And so you can be strategic about getting that experience and making sure your employees are getting that experience so they're ready to go. And as I mentioned as well, from thinking to myself as an individual contributor in my role from a day-to-day, I am better at my day-to-day treasury job role because of the diverse experiences that I have. So that's a benefit that my boss feels as a result of that, right? And that doesn't happen unless you can move around a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that insight. Scotty, do we have any questions from the audience?
We really don't. No, we have a couple of comments, but no questions. So I guess now's a good time just to say, for those of you watching right now, please feel free to pop in and ask Brian or any of us here at the Treasury Talent team what your questions are. But still not seeing anything come through, you guys. And so I think we're pretty well set to wrap it up.
All right, cool. Well, Brian, thank you very much, man. I mean, it's you have an awesome story to tell, and you've certainly been very strategic about the moves that you've made in your career, and I think that came through very clear today. So thanks for answering all the questions. We'll take you off the hot seat. And Treasury community, thanks very much for tuning in. We will be back with you next Wednesday, and we'll see you then. Take care.